The wind screamed through the mountain pass, slicing across Ethan Granger's face like 1,000 icy blades. Snow whipped through the air, swallowing the trail he rode every day. A January night in Jackson Hole forgave no one who lost their way, yet Ethan heard something that did not belong to this wilderness. A cry. Thin, urgent, then another fainter, and another still. Ethan pulled hard on the reins of his black stallion, his heartbeat quickening with the instinct of a former cavalryman, an instinct that told him life and danger had collided somewhere ahead. Squinting through the white fury, he tracked the sound. The trail ahead bore no fresh hoofprints. No one had passed this way in days. But the cries drifted from the right, where tall pines crowded together like a black wall. Ethan swung down from his horse, tightened his grip on the old Winchester, and led the animal into the trees. A few dozen steps in, he saw it a lone wooden post, half buried in snow, and lashed to it, a woman, bound with barbed wire, her body sagging forward, long black hair matted with ice and snow. Her skin was the warm bronze of the Apache, her wrists sliced to the bone by the wire, blood frozen into dark crusts. At her feet, 3 small bundles. Infants. 2 lay still, one whimpered weakly, wrapped in what looked like a torn wool blanket. Ethan didn't think he moved. Pulling the Bowie knife from his boot, he slashed through the barbs, ignoring the sting of his own blood when the blade slipped. Her head lifted, just barely, dark eyes meeting his. "Protect my daughters." She collapsed as the last wire fell away. Ethan wrapped her in his sheepskin coat, then scooped up the babies, pressing them against his chest for warmth. A long, low howl cut through the storm. Wolves. Ethan spun, catching the gleam of yellow eyes between the trees. He grabbed a burning branch from a half-buried fire pit, flinging it to break the darkness, then swung himself into the saddle, pulling the woman Ayana up in front of him, holding all 4 lives tight. The stallion screamed and leapt forward. Shadows lunged in pursuit, paws churning snow, fangs bared. Wind clawed at Ethan's face. Snow stung his eyes, but he urged the horse up the icy slope. Twisting in the saddle, he fired the Colt into the night, the crack of gunfire mixing with the wolves' howls, buying precious seconds. The dark outline of his cabin rose through the blizzard like a ghost. Ethan drove the horse onto the porch, all but kicking the door open. Firelight spilled over his face as he slammed the door shut, his back pressed to the wood, breath ragged. Outside, the wolves still howled. Inside, a different kind of battle was about to begin. Ethan dropped the rifle onto the table and moved to the hearth. The fire had died to embers, barely enough to cut the cabin's chill. He fed it split logs until the flames clawed upward, pushing back the shadows. The woman lay motionless on a pile of wool blankets. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks hollow, and the violet bloom of bruises spread across her cheekbones. The 3 babies huddled in a basket lined with rabbit pelts, their skin cold but no longer lifeless. Ethan poured goat's milk into a tin pot, setting it near the fire to warm. As it heated, he knelt beside the woman. The barbed wire had carved deep into her arms and forearms. Old welts told of more than one night bound like an animal. Whoever had left her out there had meant for her to die slow. When the milk was ready, he fed the infants one by one, using a carved wooden spoon, tucking the blankets tighter around them. Only after their breathing grew steady did he turn his attention back to her. She stirred when he dabbed warm water across her calves, washing away dried blood. Her eyes flickered open, dark, fierce, even through exhaustion. "I'm Ayana," she whispered, her voice raw from cold. "Daughter of Tala of the Chiricahua." Ethan gave a single nod. "Ethan Granger. End of free." Her gaze slid to the babies, and her voice dropped lower, almost trembling. "Their father, Samuel Quinn, a cattle baron, white. Her throat tightened. When I gave him daughters, and Apache daughters, he called them a curse. Said they'd stain his bloodline. Last night, he tied me to that post. Said if the snow didn't take me, it meant I was meant to live." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen men like Quinn before in the army, on the frontier, men who hid cowardice behind power. He didn't need to ask what Quinn intended next. "He'll come for you," Ethan said. Ayana met his gaze with a steady, unblinking look. Then you'd best be ready. Outside, the wolves had gone silent. In their place came a new sound, distant but distinct, the slow, heavy clop of horses' hooves in the snow. The fire's warmth barely reached Ethan's skin when the sound came again, closer this time. Hooves, 4, maybe 5 horses, crunching snow in slow, deliberate rhythm. Ethan crossed to the window, brushing away frost with the back of his hand. Through the swirling white, dark figures emerged, riders in long dusters, wide-brimmed hats pulled low against the wind. Even at a distance, they rode with the loose arrogance of men who believed no one could stop them. Ayanna's eyes followed him. She already had the babies wrapped in furs, their tiny faces pressed against her chest. "It's him," she said, her voice steady, almost resigned. "Quinn?" Ethan asked. She shook her head once. "His dogs." Ethan took the Winchester from the wall, checked the chamber, and slung it over his shoulder. He handed her his Colt revolver. "Know how to use it?" Ayanna spun the cylinder with a flick of her thumb, cocked the hammer, and let it ease down slow. "Better than most men." A faint smile ghosted over Ethan's face. "Good. Back door. If they breach, you get to the tree line with the girls. Follow the creek east. Don't stop." Outside, the riders dismounted, boots sinking deep into the snow. One called out, his voice muffled but carrying the tone of command. "Granger, we're looking for a squaw and 3 brats. Samuel Quinn says they're his property. Hand 'em over, and nobody gets hurt." Ethan stepped onto the porch, the Winchester resting loose in his hands but pointed toward the ground. "You rode a long way to say something that stupid." The lead rider grinned without warmth. "Ain't stupid if it pays." His hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. Ethan's voice dropped low. "Try it." The first shot cracked the air before the man's fingers even touched the grip. Ethan's Winchester barking flame, the slug kicking up snow inches from the man's boot. The riders froze. "You got one chance," Ethan said, voice steady over the wind. "Leave. Now." Instead, they fanned out. 2 moved left toward the corral, 1 toward the cabin's flank. From inside came the sharp report of the Colt. One rider staggered, clutching his arm as blood spattered the snow. Ayanna's silhouette filled the back doorway, smoke curling from the revolver's barrel. Ethan's chest tightened, not with fear, but with grim admiration. She wasn't running. She was fighting. The standoff shattered into chaos, gunfire flashing in the storm, horses screaming, boots pounding through snow. The first battle for the cabin had begun. Snow exploded in bursts as bullets tore through the storm. Ethan fired from the porch, forcing 2 riders to duck behind the corral fence. Another bullet ricocheted off the cabin wall, showering splinters across his boots. Inside, Ayanna kept low. The babies swaddled together in a fur sling across her back. She reloaded the Colt with quick, sure motions, eyes locked on the back door. She'd grown up watching her brothers hunt deer in the canyons. This wasn't so different. "Ethan," she called over the gunfire. "They're circling to cut us off." He glanced toward the slope behind the cabin already. 2 riders were angling to block the narrow trail east. If they sealed it, escape was over. Ethan made his choice in the space of a breath. He slung the Winchester over his shoulder, vaulted the porch rail, and sprinted for the stable. A shot grazed his coat, but he didn't stop. Bursting inside, he threw open the stall of his black stallion and Ayanna's bay mare, both still saddled from the night before. "Ayanna now?" he bellowed. She appeared from the back, revolver still in hand, eyes fierce in the dim light. Without a word, she swung onto the bay, securing the babies with one arm. Ethan mounted the stallion, kicked hard, and they tore out of the stable into the white chaos. 2 riders spotted them and gave chase, rifles cracking. Snow spat up around the horses' hooves. Ethan turned in the saddle, fired twice. One rider spun sideways and hit the ground hard. The other reined back, cursing. They plunged into the pass, wind screaming, walls of rock looming on either side. The trail narrowed to barely a horse's width. Behind them, hoofbeats thundered, more men giving chase. Up ahead, the old wooden bridge over Dead Man's Gorge groaned under the weight of ice. Ethan knew it wouldn't hold for long, and he meant to make sure no one crossed it after them. "Ride across and don't look back," he shouted. Ayana didn't question. She shot across, snow and frost spraying from the mare's hooves. Ethan followed, then swung down on the far side. With 3 quick strikes of his axe, he shattered the frozen support beam. The bridge collapsed into the chasm with a deafening crack, carrying the leading rider and his horse into the abyss. The rest skidded to a halt on the far side, shouting in rage. Breathing hard, Ethan turned to Ayana. That bought us time. Not much. She met his eyes, snow clinging to her lashes. Then we keep riding. They kicked their horses into the storm, vanishing into the high pass, leaving Quinn's men screaming across the void. The wind knifed through the narrow pass, carrying with it the distant shouts of men. Ethan didn't need to hear the words to know they'd be coming the long way around, and they'd be faster than the storm. Ayana's mare stumbled on the icy trail, but she steadied it with a gentle pull and a whispered word in Apache. The babies, bundled tight against her, whimpered softly, feeling the tension through their mother's heartbeat. They'll split up, Ethan said over the wind. One group to cut us off, one to drive us. You've hunted before, Ayana replied. I've been hunted before, he said. They crested a ridge, and Ethan spotted it, a thin thread of smoke curling against the white sky, far ahead. A trapper's hut, shelter, maybe supplies. But between them and that hut lay open snowfield, no cover for 200 yards. Ethan reined in, scanning the ridges. Too quiet, snow-muffled sound. But he trusted his gut. They're here. As if summoned, a rifle cracked from the rocks above. The bullet smashed into a pine trunk inches from Ayana's shoulder. She didn't flinch. She kicked her mare into a gallop, leaning low over the neck. Ethan followed, the stallion's hooves tearing through snow. More shots rang out, sending white plumes into the air around them. Ethan fired back on the run, the Winchester kicking against his shoulder. One shadow in the rocks tumbled out of sight. The rest kept firing. They hit the open field at full sprint. Hoofbeats thundered behind them. Quinn's men had timed it well, charging in from the tree line. 2 riders angled to cut them off, ropes swinging from their saddles. Ethan swerved hard, snow spraying as he drew his Colt. The first pursuer's rope sailed wide. Ethan's return shot slammed into the man's chest, pitching him backward into the snow. Ayana ducked low as the second rider's lasso looped past her, missing by inches. She twisted in the saddle and fired once the man's hat flew off as he yanked his reins, retreating. They tore across the field and reached the hut's door just as another shot splintered the frame. Ethan kicked it open, shoving Ayana and the girls inside. The place was abandoned, smelling of old smoke and furs. He dropped the bar into place and turned to her. We can't stay long. Her dark eyes met his. Then we make it a place they'll regret coming to. Outside, hoofbeats slowed. Voices carried on the wind low, confident. They thought they had their prey cornered. Inside, Ethan and Ayana were already loading every weapon they had. The hut was barely more than 4 log walls and a slanted roof, but tonight it would be a fortress. Ethan slammed the last cartridge into his Winchester, then slid 2 knives into his belt. Ayana checked the Colt, then slipped a smaller hide-handled blade into her boot. The babies lay swaddled together in a corner behind a stack of pelts, their small breaths hidden under the crackle of the fire Ethan had just lit, not for warmth, but for the smoke. In a whiteout, a thin plume of smoke could blind a man's aim. Outside, hooves stopped. Boots hit snow. Silence, then a man's voice, smooth and mocking. Granger, you've made this harder than it needs to be. We want the woman and the brats. You walk away now. Maybe we let you live. Oh. Ethan leaned against the wall, voice flat. You've got one problem with that. What's that? I don't make deals with cowards. The first shot came through the wall, splintering wood inches from Ayana's head. She didn't flinch. She moved to the window slit and fired twice. A man cursed outside. Then the snow erupted. Bullets punched through the hut's walls, kicking up splinters and sending smoke swirling. Ethan returned fire in tight, deliberate shots, each one aimed to count. He saw one rider drop near the corral, another drag himself behind a woodpile. Ayana ducked to the other side of the hut, switched to her bow, yes. A bow, and sent an arrow hissing through the storm. A scream followed. Still faster than your rifles, she muttered. They were outnumbered 6-2, but the storm was their ally. Visibility dropped to a few yards, forcing Quinn's men to stumble through drifts. Ethan moved constantly, never firing from the same spot twice. One man tried the door. Ethan met him with the butt of the Winchester, smashing him backward into the snow. Ayanna vaulted the window, rolled into the drift outside, and slashed another man's leg before he could bring his rifle up. It was brutal, fast, and close. Within minutes, the ground outside was littered with bodies and groaning wounded. The last two riders fled into the storm, their shouts fading. Ethan grabbed the reins of a surviving horse, tossing the saddlebag inside. Ammo, jerky, canteens. They brought supplies. Ayanna was already bundling the babies. Then we take them and go. Quinn will come himself next time. Ethan looked at her over the flicker of the dying fire. Then let's make sure we're ready when he does. They rode out into the snow, leaving the hut in silence, the wind already erasing the fight from the land. By dawn, the storm had thinned to a pale veil over the mountains. The air was sharp, the kind that burned the lungs. Ethan and Ayanna rode hard through the narrow pine valleys, the babies sleeping against her chest, their tiny breaths hidden in the steady rhythm of the horse's stride. They stopped only once to water the animals at a frozen creek. While Ethan broke the ice with his boot heel, Ayanna kept watch on the ridges. That's when she saw it. A dark figure on a ridge half a mile away. Motionless, watching. Even at that distance, she knew. Samuel Quinn. He sat his chestnut gelding like a man born in the saddle, a long black coat snapping in the wind, silver conchos glinting on the reins. His hat brim shadowed his face, but she didn't need to see his eyes to feel them. Cold. Calculating. He's here, Ayanna said quietly. Ethan didn't look up from the creek. I know. Quinn raised a gloved hand. 3 riders emerged from behind him, then another 2. Fresh men rested, well-armed, and riding fast. Ethan mounted without another word. We move. Now. They pushed the horses into a gallop, snow spraying like shattered glass beneath the hooves. Behind them, Quinn's whistle cut through the wind sharp and commanding, and the riders surged forward in pursuit. The chase twisted through ravines and across frozen meadows. Ayanna fired over her shoulder, dropping one pursuer into the snow, but the others kept coming. Quinn stayed back, riding high on the ridge, herding them towards something unseen. Ethan's gut tightened. He's driving us somewhere. Minutes later, he saw it an old logging road, narrow and lined with cliffs. Once inside, there'd be no way out except forward. He's pushing us into a box, Ethan said. Then we burn the box, Ayanna replied. Ethan grinned despite the danger. Hold tight. As they entered the pass, Ethan lit the fuse on a stick of dynamite from his saddlebag, one of the few he'd kept from his mining days. They rounded a bend, then he flung it into the rock wall above. The blast shattered the air, sending a cascade of boulders thundering down behind them. The road vanished under tons of stone, cutting Quinn's men off in a roar of dust and snow. For now, they were free. But Ethan knew that look in Quinn's eyes. He wouldn't stop. Not until he had them or they had him. They reached Ethan's cabin by dusk. Smoke from the hearth curled into the cold sky, the only sign of warmth for miles. Ethan had built this place to be a refuge. Tonight, it would be a fortress. He and Ayanna worked without speaking. He barred the doors, nailed extra planks over the shutters, and stacked wood high inside. She moved the babies to the root cellar, tucking them into a cradle of furs with enough food and water for 2 days, just in case. The sun dipped low, painting the snowfields in blood-red light. That's when they heard it. Hoofbeats. Many. Ayanna stepped to the window. A column of riders moved through the pines, black shapes against the drifted white. At their head rode Samuel Quinn. He was close enough now that she could see the cold smile under his hat brim. You can still ride, Ethan said, checking the load in his Winchester. Get to the law in town. Her dark eyes met his. You think I'd leave you here alone? Before he could answer, Quinn's voice carried up from the yard. Granger, you've got something of mine. Send her out, and maybe I let you walk away. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. You've been riding a long way for a woman who doesn't want you, Quinn. She's mine by law, Quinn snapped. And those half-breed brats, the shot cut him off. Ayanna's bullet took the feather from his hat clean off. Next one's between your eyes, she called from the window. Quinn's men surged forward, and the fight exploded. Gunfire cracked through the freezing air. Ethan dropped 2 riders before they reached the porch. Ayanna's shots from the loft kept another 3 pinned behind the corral. Quinn himself dismounted, moving through the chaos like a man who'd done this before. He kicked a wounded man out of the way, took cover behind the old woodpile, and fired with cold precision. The battle raged in bursts, men rushing the porch only to fall back under withering fire. Smoke curled in the cabin, the walls shuddering with every shot. Then came the silence. No shouts, no hoofbeats. Ethan reloaded, scanning the yard. He's not gone. Ayanna's eyes narrowed. Number. He's here. From the barn shadow, Quinn stepped forward, gun in one hand, long knife in the other. His coat was torn, snow crusting his boots. This ends now, Granger. Ethan handed Ayanna his rifle. Keep him off the porch. Then he stepped into the snow to meet Quinn face to face. The snow crunched under Ethan's boots as he stepped down from the porch, his breath a steady cloud in the freezing air. Quinn stood 10 paces away, his black coat rippling in the wind, one gloved hand gripping a revolver, the other a long hunting knife, with a bone handle that gleamed pale as ice. The yard between them was a battlefield littered with still forms and streaks of red melting into the white. Above, the last light of day burned faint in a sky the color of steel. From the cabin window, Ayanna's dark eyes watched, the rifle steady in her hands, waiting for the right moment. You could have made this easy, Quinn said, voice calm but edged with malice. But you chose to play hero. You think this ends with you standing? Ethan kept moving, slow, deliberate. I'm not here to stand, Quinn. I'm here to finish it. They circled each other, boots digging into the snow, every step measured. Then Quinn snapped his revolver up and fired. Ethan twisted aside, feeling the bullet hiss past his ribs. He dropped low, drawing his own Colt, and fired twice. One round tore Quinn's coat at the shoulder, the other punched into the woodpile behind him. Quinn moved fast for a man his size, closing the distance with a predator's precision. He slammed into Ethan, both men going down hard in the snow. The revolvers skidded out of reach. They rose together, knives flashing in the dim light. Quinn struck first, his blade slicing across Ethan's coat and grazing the skin beneath. The burn of the cut was sharp, but Ethan didn't falter. He parried with his own hunting knife, steel ringing against steel in the cold air. Ayanna's voice cut through the wind. Ethan, left. He shifted just in time, Quinn's blade missing his ribs by an inch. Ethan countered with a driving slash, catching Quinn across the forearm. Blood welled dark against the snow. But Quinn didn't slow, he grinned, a mad light in his eyes. You fight like a man with something to lose, Quinn taunted. That's how men die. Ethan didn't answer. Words wouldn't stop Quinn. Quinn lunged again, but Ethan caught his wrist, twisting hard until the knife clattered to the ground. Quinn slammed a fist into Ethan's jaw, snapping his head back, then tackled him into the snow. They rolled, trading blows, breath coming in ragged bursts. Ethan felt the icy wet seeping into his shirt, the sharp sting of every movement. Ayanna fired from the window. The shot slammed into the ground inches from Quinn's knee, forcing him to break his hold. Ethan drove an elbow into Quinn's ribs, then scrambled to his feet, knife back in his hand. Quinn came up slower this time, blood dripping from his sleeve. She's a better shot than you, he spat, nodding toward the cabin. Ethan's eyes narrowed. That's why she's still alive. They clashed again, blades striking with savage force. Ethan's world narrowed to Quinn's eyes, the twist of his shoulders, the angle of each strike. Every movement was life or death. Quinn's knife slashed across Ethan's forearm, opening a deep line. Pain flared hot, but Ethan stepped into it, using the momentum to drive his shoulder into Quinn's chest. The impact sent them both crashing into the snowbank by the barn. They grappled there, boots slipping, knives scraping against frozen wood. Quinn drove his knee into Ethan's side, knocking the breath from him. His hand closed around Ethan's knife wrist, forcing it toward his own chest. Not so easy now, is it? Quinn growled. Ethan shifted his weight suddenly, letting Quinn's force carry him forward. They rolled again, and now Ethan was on top, his knee pressing into Quinn's injured arm. "You left her to die," Ethan said, voice low and dangerous. "You left your own children to freeze." Quinn's lip curled. "They were never mine." Ugh. Ethan's knife came down. Quinn caught his wrist, both men straining, their faces inches apart. The wind howled through the yard, snow stinging their eyes. Slowly, Ethan's strength began to force the blade closer. A gunshot cracked. Quinn jerked the round head torn into his side. Ayanna stood at the cabin door now, rifle smoking, her face set and unflinching. Quinn's grip faltered. Ethan drove the knife into his chest, the steel sinking deep. Quinn's breath caught in a sharp gasp, eyes going wide. For a long second, neither moved. Then Ethan wrenched the blade free. Quinn sagged back into the snow, blood spreading beneath him, steam rising in the cold. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. His eyes fixed on the gray sky above, then went still. Ethan stayed kneeling a moment longer, chest heaving, knife dripping red onto the snow. The world was silent now except for the soft cry of one of the babies from the root cellar. Ayanna crossed the yard to him, her boots leaving dark prints in the snow. She didn't speak, she just held out her hand. Ethan took it, letting her pull him to his feet. "It's over," she said. Ethan shook his head slightly. "It's never over, but it's enough for tonight." They left Quinn's body where it fell. By morning, the snow would cover him, and the mountain would take him like it took all things that didn't belong. Back inside, Ayanna unwrapped the babies, holding each to the firelight. Their cheeks were warm, their breathing steady. Ethan cleaned his knife, set it on the table, and finally allowed himself to sink into the chair by the hearth. Ayanna sat across from him, her dark hair damp with melting snow, her hands cradling their daughters. For a long time, they didn't speak. The fire popped softly, the storm outside easing to a whisper. When Ethan finally looked up, it was to find Ayanna watching him. There was no fear in her eyes now, only something deep and steady. "You fought for them," she said quietly, "and for me." Ethan nodded. "Always." Outside, the wind carried the last traces of battle away into the pines. The mountain was quiet again, but in the cabin's warm glow, the air was thick with something stronger than silence. Trust, forged in fire and blood, and a promise that neither storm nor man could break. Tomorrow, they would bury the dead, mend the damage, and keep the fire burning. But tonight, they stayed close. The 3 small lives they had fought for safe in the circle of their arms. And for the first time in years, Ethan Granger let himself believe that winter might finally be behind them. Spring came late to the high ridges, but when it arrived, it did so with a quiet grace. Snow retreated in ragged patches, revealing black earth and the first green shoots of grass. The river thawed, its ice breaking apart and rushing down to the lowlands with a sound like distant thunder. Ethan spent the first weeks after Quinn's death repairing what the fight had broken. The porch railings were replaced, bullet holes in the cabin walls patched with fresh pine boards. The barn door was rehung on new iron hinges, and the corral fence mended. Each day he worked, his shoulder and forearm ached from the battle, but he welcomed the pain. It was proof they had survived. Ayanna tended to the land as she had been taught by her Apache elders. She cleared the yard of winter's debris, scattered seed for the early crops, and walked the ridgelines to make sure no more threats were near. She did not speak much of that night, but the way she kept the rifle within easy reach told Ethan she remembered every moment. The babies Eloise, Ruth, and June grew quickly. Their small hands learned to grasp, their eyes bright and curious. On warmer days, Ayanna carried them outside, laying them on a blanket under the open sky while she worked. Ethan would pause in his labor to watch them, the sound of their laughter light as wind through pine needles. Word of Quinn's fate spread slowly but surely through the territory. Some whispered that the mountain had swallowed him, others that justice had been done by a steady hand. Either way, no one came looking to claim what was now theirs. By early summer, the cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was becoming what Ayanna called a hearth, a place where fire and family kept the cold out, and where weary travelers could rest. Ethan built extra bunks along one wall, and Aina cooked meals from venison, beans, and wild herbs. Riders passing through began to stop, drawn by the scent of food and the promise of safety. One evening, after the last guest had gone, Ethan found Ayana on the porch. The babies were asleep inside, their tiny breaths audible through the open window. She sat with her feet bare, a mug of pine tea in her hands, looking out at the valley. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked quietly. Her dark eyes turned toward him. "Number, I'm thinking about roots." Ethan lowered himself into the chair beside her. "Roots can be dangerous. They tie you to one place. They also keep you from blowing away," she said. For a long while, they watched the sunset bleed gold into the hills. The air was warm, carrying the scent of fresh earth and new life. "I never thanked you," Ethan said finally. "Not just for fighting that night, for choosing to stay." Ayana's smile was small, but real. "You fought for me before I even knew you. I just fought back when it was my turn." Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the wind was soft, the mountain at peace. For the first time since the winter began, Ethan felt that peace sink into his bones. When darkness fell, they went inside together. Ayana checked the babies one last time, then joined Ethan by the hearth. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The warmth between them was stronger than the flames. The mountain would bring more winters, more storms, maybe even more fights. But now, they faced them together not just as survivors, but as a family. The hearth at Granger Ridge had been built from wood and stone, but what kept it standing was something harder to break: trust, forged in the fire of battle, and the stubborn love of two people who refused to let go. And as the embers glowed low in the dark, Ethan and Ayana knew they had not just survived the winter, they had claimed the mountain as their own. The ridge was quiet in a way Ethan hadn't heard in years. No hoofbeats on the trail, no crack of rifles echoing through the pines, only the soft hum of summer wind and the distant rush of the creek. The hearth at Granger Ridge had survived winter's cruelty and the violence of men. Now, with the sun hanging low over the mountains, it felt as though the land itself was taking a long, deep breath. Ethan leaned against the porch rail, watching the three little girls chase each other in the tall grass. Eloise, the boldest, led the charge, her dark hair catching the light. Ruth stumbled but laughed, brushing dirt from her knees without slowing. June trailed behind, clutching a small carved rabbit Ethan had made for her, smiling as though the world could hold no harm. Inside, Ayana's voice floated through the open window, soft and steady as she sang a lullaby in her native Apache tongue. It was a song she'd told him was meant for protection, one her mother had sung when storms rolled in. Tonight, it was not the sky she meant to keep safe, it was them. When she stepped out onto the porch, the sunset caught her face, turning her dark eyes to molten gold. She carried a clay bowl filled with berries she'd foraged that morning, their deep reds and purples like drops of summer caught in her hands. "Hungry?" she asked, setting the bowl beside him. Ethan picked one up, rolling it between his fingers before eating. "Sweet," he said. Ayana smiled faintly. "This valley keeps its promises when you treat it right." They stood in companionable silence, watching the girls' laughter drift into the open air. The cabin behind them smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke. The garden rows were thick with green beans, squash, and corn Ethan had planted under Ayana's watchful eye. He thought of all the winters before this one, the long nights where the fire was the only thing between him and the cold. Now, warmth didn't just come from the hearth. It came from them, from the steady presence of Ayana, from the soft weight of small hands pulling at his sleeve, from knowing the cabin no longer held only one pair of boots by the door. The sun slipped lower, staining the clouds in streaks of rose and amber. Ayana rested her hand lightly on his arm. "The mountain feels different," she said quietly. "How so?" "Quieter," she said, her gaze on the horizon. "But not empty, like it's watching over us." Ethan didn't answer right away. He knew the mountain had a way of testing those who claimed it as home. They had been tested, and they had passed not without scars, but together. As the first stars blinked into the deepening blue, the girls returned to the porch, cheeks flushed, hair tangled by the wind. Ayana gathered them close, her voice warm as she led them inside. Ethan lingered a moment longer, letting the night settle around him. The air smelled of pine and earth, the kind of scent that told a man he belonged to a place as much as it belonged to him. He closed the door softly behind him, the glow of the hearth spilling across the room. The firelight caught the carved names above the cradle: Eloise, Ruth, June, letters smooth under his fingertips. Outside, the ridge lay under the quiet watch of the mountain. Inside, the four of them sat together, the day's light fading into the steady, golden hum of peace.